So yeah, I've been here a couple of times to talk about the inspector. The first talk showed off some very basic dev tools. That was in August. In November, I did a live demo of it working, and that was exciting enough. And today, I'll talk about why I built the inspector, the team we have around it, and then how we use it at Etsy and how other people are using it, and how I hope you guys can use it too. And this is Backbone under the magnifying glass because I think for the first time we'll have a really good inspector to use for people building Marionette apps, which is nice. So to show you what I mean, I've got a couple apps here. I've got this Marionette Wires app, which is like a starter kit. I've got Gistbook, which is this cool little Marionette app that a friend of mine worked on. And then I've got the Etsy app that we've been working on for the past 8 months, and the To-Do app. And the way I like to think about it is that without the inspector, I'd have to understand the code to understand the app. So if I was starting a new project, I'd jump into some code, start reading this thing, jump around. And it'd be really frustrating to actually figure out what's going on. I could also jump into an app, choose any app, it doesn't matter. Look at the console. Does it have like an app object here? Oh, it does. Cool. What objects does it have? What properties does it have? It's kind of frustrating. But we now have an inspector. And the inspector for Marionette works a lot like the other dev tools that Chrome offers, in that we have a magnifying glass, and you can click on anything, and it takes you to that view. And once you look at the view, you can look at all its properties, its UI elements, its options, see if it has a model that's backing it, what those values are. It really allows you to explore the application, understand how it works, without necessarily going to the code first. So I'm really excited about this inspector, and I'll show you some more about it. So the inspector wouldn't happen if we didn't have a great organization behind it. The Marionette Inspector started off of the Backbone debugger, which is a fantastic project, and then it's been supported by Etsy, Marionette Core. We have a whole team now, and I work on it. The debugger was built by Manuel as a thesis project, and it's a really solid foundation. We're really lucky to build on top of it. Etsy has let me work on it for the past 2 months, and there have been many people at work who've helped. This is an official Marionette plugin, so we've got Core backing it. If we need anything, we can go to them. They help us. It's a really symbiotic relationship. There have been tons of developers. Christian's worked on it. Ian's working on it. Lots of people are coming to us to help out, and that's fantastic. We've even begun talking to other companies, too. So like Etsy, other companies are willing to sponsor time so that their engineers can work on the inspector as well. And I think as we look at open source going forward, one of the important trends is that we all use it, yet very few of us contribute to it. So being comfortable talking to your employer, talking to your manager and saying, I want to give back to these tools, I want to make the tools I use better every day, is going to become more and more important. And as I build out this project and as we build out this project, I want this to be the kind of thing that you can come to and work on. We're at 0.3. We've got a long way to go for the inspector to be really good. This is the perfect time to get involved. So what do you need to get involved? The first thing is we've got a chat room. So we've got 30 of us in the room. We're talking about it all the time. Come in, ask any questions. We use Screen Hero. I'm on Screen Hero 2 hours a day, which means I can remote pair with any of you and get you set up. And we can start working on a feature pretty quickly. Once you get involved, you can ask any of us a question. We'll Screen Hero, and we'll be sharing the same screen, same mouse, same keyboard. It'll be awesome. We also have a lot of issues for getting started. So all these help wanted issues are tickets that are fully documented with clear problem statements, features that we want, and then a patch that you can apply and get started with. So for example, I just plucked one of them. When we show an object in the inspector, we want it to be formatted nicely. We format many things well. We don't format jQuery objects well. We format them just like an object. So if you look right here, it looks like an object, and I think it should look like jQuery. So for this feature to work, we have this patch where you can update the serialize function. It would be great if you add it. I think this should just work, but I haven't tested yet. So if you want to get involved, you can patch it. You can add a test. It'll be great. We want as many people to get involved as possible. All right, so I have to tell you a little bit about myself. I went to Hacker School, which is a retreat for engineers before going to Etsy. I've been at Etsy for 2 years. I love REPLs. REPLs are interactive environments like IRB where you can type something in and see what comes out. I've worked on Pry at Hacker School and BPython, which is kind of where I got to know what it was like to work on REPLs and interactive environments. And the big takeaway with this was that they're just tools. They're just code, compilations of code. You can work on it, and it's not so bad. You don't have to be like a super genius to make an addition to a tool. A REPL stands for Read, Evaluate, Print Loop. It's a fancy way of saying we have a loop, we read code in, we evaluate it with whatever we want to do, and then we print it out, and then repeat. While I was working on Pry, I worked on autocomplete, and that was saying, as you type into the console, maybe we can, with tab, show you what you're typing. So if you, in the first example, hit tab, you get toString. In the second, you get rotate, whatever. And what surprised me with this was how simple the code that was behind the scenes was. In fact, it's like a total hack. So we take in the code, and we say, if this thing looks like a regex, we have a regex that checks for regexes. If it looks like an array, if it looks like a proc, just go get all the methods for a regex, get all the methods for an array, and see which one matches what you've typed. So if in the first example, it looks like you're typing on a regex, so you see the 2 slashes. We're like, go get those methods and get the methods that have 2s. If it looks like you're typing something on an object, func.func, go get all the messages that apply to func. It doesn't really matter like what this code's doing. I just want to show you that like it's just code at the end of the day, and you can read it. So I like REPLs. We've got a really good team. I hope you all get involved in the project. What should we talk about today? The agenda is to show you why to use an inspector, like why I think an inspector is useful, give you some case studies, talk about how the inspector is built, and then the future of dynamic systems, basically like tools in general and how I see that going. So the argument for an inspector is a couple things. The first is that I think inspectors offer a higher level of abstraction. So we're all used to building websites where there's like DOM and JavaScript. And as we build more sophisticated web applications, we want to think in terms of the views and the models as well, and maybe the events that wire the whole thing up together. And frankly, like it doesn't matter if you use Marionette, Ember, or Angular. Like we should all be thinking in terms of these higher levels of abstractions and then highlighting that through tooling. And the tools are getting better too, by the way. Like you look at Chrome DevTools, they're not stagnant. They're adding promises soon. They're adding canvas inspectors. Like the tools are just continuing to get better. The next argument is that as you build the inspectors, you get to explore your applications in ways that you couldn't by just reading the code or looking at the elementary inspectors. With the Marionette Inspector, I can click on a view, jump to a model, jump back to another view that's listening to an event, jump into the Elements Inspector, and then back to the Sources tab. It's all clickable. It's all explorable. And with that, you tighten the feedback loop. So now that I can see everything, I can see what changes. And that's huge, right? Like I show a pop-up, I close a pop-up. Did all the data go away cleanly? Did the events get unbound? Like those are things you might miss the first time around if you're not using the specs because the thing just works. But if we can tighten the feedback loop with like really good tools, you can see what's going on. And then the last thing that I think is really important and gets missed is that with the inspector, you're sharing information amongst your team. Like as our applications become more sophisticated, we're working closer with designers. We're working closer with other engineers. And our teams are growing. The complexity of like the social problem is growing. And something like the inspector will help you share that knowledge with other people on the team. Like I might be working on one thing, you might be working on another thing, and I don't really know your stuff, you don't know my stuff. With the inspector, I can jump in and quickly understand what you've been working on and see how it works without necessarily understanding the code. So I'm really excited about the inspector as just like a communication platform like unit tests or like better documentation. All right, so let me show you how this works. Now, as a caveat, I haven't really practiced these demos, so they're a little rough. The first example is the Etsy app. Back in November of last year, we were looking at the Etsy shop management stuff, and it's all a PHP static site. So you can think of like managing your inventory, like getting an HTML form back or a table back. It's better than that, but it was kind of like that. And we wanted to do a whole single page rich client redesign, and we came up with something a little bit like this. So over here, you see your inventory. I just have one active item in my shop. I can look at the expired listings. I've got more of those. You can see like the grid view, which is kind of cool. See the cards, show some stats, hide some stats. If I go back to active, I can start editing. And then actually like really start editing. And we did a lot with the form to like make it really pretty and responsive. So when we bring engineers onto our team, it takes them about a couple days to understand where the code kind of resides and the lay of the land. And then after a week, they're pretty productive. And the general sentiment is that, like, yeah, this code is actually really readable. It's verbose, but it's easy once you understand the mental map. The big problem is that like getting that mental map takes a week. And I think the inspector can help with that a lot. So the first thing you do is start the inspector. And this is going to do a refresh. I'm running this on Etsy.com, so all the JavaScript's minified. The only reason why I can show anything good is that a lot of the stuff like isn't minified. So we're relying on that, like the region names are not minified. The first question that an engineer on the team might have is, how do I add a feature to a photo? So maybe I want to like add something to this dropdown. And if you're just reading the code, it's really hard to find the view that corresponds to that photo edit dropdown thing. Like, where does that belong? But with the magnifying glass, I can just go in and click on it, and it should show me over here where it is. It should. Maybe it doesn't. Yep. OK, cool. So it's in the overlay region. And it's got some options, some properties. That's cool. I can also like go in here. You know what's going on? I'm highlighting the mask. I can go in here, click on add a photo, and it should jump over there. And this is neat because I can see that there's some events corresponding to these elements. Like there's an image actions dropdown, and it tells me that there's like a hand or on trigger or something, or maybe a delete thing, and there's on delete. So you get like a lot of information, and you can click in and see what's going on. If I want to go deeper, I can click on that download button, and then actually play with the instance. So maybe get its EL. All the data is there too, so I can see all the models. Like we create a lot of models on the fly, and I can just like go in and like see what attributes there are, what properties there are. If anything changes, we record that as well. And then of course there's the radio. If you haven't used Marionette, we have one global event bus called the radio with channels. So if I want to show an overlay, I might tell the app to show an overlay and command it to do that right over here. And then if I go back to listings, the region tree updates, and I can like begin traversing and like find the listing card. So that's the Etsy app, and with the inspector, as an engineer on the team, I can get a much better idea of where all the code resides and like what's going on with the application. The next two demos horrify me a lot more because I did not write these apps. So with Marionette wires, this is like the canonical starter kit. This is the best one I know of. You can like look at a list of colors, or look at a list of books, click on a book, and like jump around. So I could show you the code, but I don't understand it. So instead, I'm just going to show you the inspector. That's a little easier. So the first thing I want to know here is how this app is set up. And there's the header up top. There's probably like a sub app for books or colors, and then there's something. So just like mousing around, I could see that there's a header view. I don't know what flashes is. That's kind of cool. We can explore that. Content is probably where James Smith is the guy who worked on this. No, James Kyle. So content's probably where James Kyle puts like books or colors. And then these views probably map up nicely to like each item in the list. So like I'm looking at that star over here, the star, and it works, and I click on it, it turns blue. And I want to know why it turns blue. So I see that there's a UI element, there's an event handler on click star. And if I click on it, I can see that it takes me to the code. And this is cool. So immediately I can see that there's a model with an attribute featured, and that will go back and forth from true to false. And then I see that the view's element attributes change when I want to show a star. And that updates it, and then it's done. So the point of that demo is that I don't need to understand how the code is set up to figure out the code that's executed to update the star, which is really, really cool. That's a really powerful feature. The other thing I can do here, because I set up Chrome Workspaces, has anyone used Chrome Workspaces before? Awesome. Watch this. Right? Save it. It reloads. And now, when I click it, the debugger's there. I can find this in the code. On click star now has debugger in there. I could do the same thing with events. Save it. The code just is added. So this is an example of the assets in the source panel being mapped to the code that you keep in your Git repo, and it just auto-updates both ways. So I can update the sources panel, and it updates the code. And then if I were really crazy, I'd do the same thing over here. Because James Kyle updated Marionette wires to show reloads, to do browser syncs, I get the update as well. So this is not a Marionette Inspector feature. This is just something I wanted to highlight. I have the workspaces set up and browser sync set up, so I can make code changes to the sources panel or the source. It doesn't matter. It just gets auto-updated, which is really, really cool. And I think that's really the inspector in a nutshell, just exploring your app, seeing what's going on. I can also, if you're interested, show you the gist book later, but it would show you the same thing. Like, there's an app that I didn't write with a really cool setup, and we can use the inspector to see what's going on. So behind the scenes, how is the inspector built? The big takeaway here, I'm going to show you a lot of things. The big takeaway is that it's not magic. I want you all to feel like you can come in and work on it, or at least believe that it's just code at the end of the day. All right. So the first concept for setting up the inspector is that this Marionette Inspector is just another Chrome extension that you could build and add anywhere. The fact that it's added to this window doesn't really matter. So given as a Chrome extension, and this is just like another window, I can, ready for this, open an inspector for the inspector. It's just a website. And with this second inspector, I'm going to call it I2, I can inspect the first inspector, I'm going to call I1. So I'm going to click on this magnifying glass and then mouse over here. And I'm just inspecting the inspector as if it's a website, because it is, it's just a website. And this doesn't just apply to the inspector that I've been working on. I can inspect the Elements tab with I2 as well. So yeah. That's the element mapped to that element, which is really mapped to the app, like right over there. So with the inspector as just a web page, I can inspect the running inspector. I can jump to that pane, and I can actually like look inside of the inspector and get its UI, which is just the sub app, and maybe get the data, so the list of views. This whole region tree is computed from the view collection, and because the inspector is just an app, I can inspect it as well. I can't open the Marionette Inspector on the Marionette Inspector, but I think it's possible. So the second concept that's really important is that the way the inspector works, I can show you, is that when you start up the inspector, it's just going to refresh the page and inject the agent into the window. So when I hit that start button, it's going to add a script to the application that will create an agent object. So I'll just go here, window.agent, and there it is. The agent's responsible for doing all the spying on the application. So the agent starts off and finds the Backbone library and the Marionette library, and then all the classes like Backbone View, Backbone Model, Marionette, Module, Marionette Application, and monkey patches them. It changes them so that whenever a view is created, we know about it. And that's really cool because like, as soon as we're notified of a new view, we can send that view stuff over to the inspector. When I say view stuff, I mean like a serialized representation of the view. So if I go to agent, I can ask for all the components, and I'll see that, yeah, there are a lot of views that we now know about because we're listening to this app. So in code, that looks like this. The agent patches the libraries, patches the classes, and then detects new class instances and serializes them and ships them over to the inspector. Patching just means as soon as a new view is detected, serialize it, register it, and then listen for changes to that view. Serializing is saying whenever we want to serialize a view, go get its options, its UI element, its properties, and then ship that data up to the inspector. This is a fun one. The magnifying glass, which I showed you, where you mouse over the app and it like draws a blue box. All we need for that is to know all the views on the page and then set up handlers like mouse over, mouse leave, and mouse down. Once we have that, we can just like draw a box over an element. That's easy. The inspector is just a Marionette app. That's the most important thing to know. There are 4 sub-apps like UI, data, radio, and activity. And those apps are just really simple to build as well. Injecting the agent is just like a Chrome command, and responding to client messages is all it does. So the UI sub-app gets client events like a new view is created or a view is changed, and then updates the view collection to like add the new view or whatever. And that's kind of the inspector behind the scenes. Where are we going? I think we're actually going to the past. Way back in the day, there was Smalltalk. Has anyone used Smalltalk? Yes, yes. You two are cooler than I am. I have not. I've only heard stories of this world. In Smalltalk, everything was saved to an instance. So you wouldn't write code to the files. Like you wouldn't have a file. You would just like update the application on the fly. And because everything was dynamic, you could query it for classes. You could see all the classes in your application just by writing some code. And then you could see all the instances for a class. It was all there for you. And that's wonderful. I think we have that now with where the browser's at. The browser is our interactive environment. And with that, we can see all the classes that Backbone has, so all the view classes. We can find all the instances for a class. We can query that to see where they are on the page. We have tons and tons of information. With workspaces and live reloading, we can connect the sources panel to the files. We can connect the sources panel to the Marionette Inspector for that matter, and then the elements panel. It's all available for us to use and explore. And with that, we're going to have a whole new set of tools that allow us to build applications so much easier than we would before. And I hope we're all beginning to do that. I can see Marionette doing that, Ember doing that, Angular doing that. Chrome is getting better every single day. I was working with Ian 2 hours earlier and we found 2 new features for Chrome DevTools that we had never known about before. Like, it's come in really, really quickly. And I'm excited for the future. So thank you.